They let you do all the work, and then they're going to erase the work if you decide you don't want to pay this new increased fee. That really feels unethical. I think Congress should not allow this behavior to even exist. And yet I know that Intuit does this as well. It's not just TaxSlayer. I think this is actually an industry norm, and it sucks. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for self-employed people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're a creative or soul-centered entrepreneur or wellness practitioner who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello. Welcome. Oh my goodness. We're in the glory days of summer and I'm already starting to feel pretty sad about summer ending, but let's try to grab the moment. So today I want to talk to you about my recent experience filing a tax return using commercial software. This is not something that I normally do because as a professional, I have professional grade tax software with a lot of capability. It's way more complicated than a, general user would use, but it has a lot more nuance and ability to make adjustments, right? This is part of what you get when you pay a professional to do taxes for you. They have a lot more tools at their disposal. So recently, my mother needed help filing a tax return for a relative. I'm not going to name the relative for privacy reasons, but a relative who is incapacitated in a nursing home, has some, pension and IRA income and needs a tax return filed, but is not able to do it herself. And so I, of course, offered to do that tax return, and I did it on vacation at a little cabin in the woods in Maine. And so I just used commercially available software, right? And paid just like a regular person doing their taxes. This was actually my first time doing that since before I became a tax professional. So I wanted to talk to you today about my experience and kind of what it showed me about how you probably are coming to your tax return and what I saw that felt good and not good. So let's get into it. So the first thing I wanted to try, knowing that I was going to do this tax return, is I wanted to try the new IRS free file option, right? So if you don't know, IRS free file is available to taxpayers with income in the lower 70th percentiles, right? So if your income is not in the 30th highest percentiles of income, then you are eligible for a free tax return using IRS free file. It turns out, so you have to actually go to the IRS free file site and look at what the income thresholds are. You have to also see if your state is available. I don't want to do the work twice, so I'm not going to do the work of, an IRS free federal return and then have to go use commercial software to do the state return. So anyway, this was a Massachusetts return. I knew Massachusetts would be on board free file because Massachusetts is like that. But the income was too high. The income was above the threshold that was allowed. So I could not use the IRS free file program. I'm sorry to tell you that because I would enjoy going through that. What I was able to use, I really hate Intuit, as you know, if you listen to my 3-part episode over the summer about Intuit's unbelievably baldly unethical behavior and lobbying against making your tax return free and easy to file. So I chose TaxSlayer. Okay, that's the commercial program that I chose. I know that they support some of the VITA programs, the volunteer income tax assistance programs. And so I was like, okay, these seem like good actors. I'm going to go with TaxSlayer. So here's what happened. I started out with the feeling that it didn't look like we were going to qualify for the free version of TaxSlayer. It looked like this return would qualify for the $33 threshold, right? That was what was advertised to me. This is going to cost you $33, okay? Starting out the tax return, I had my documents all organized. This is very important to get your documents organized and together, have the info all in one place as you start. This is what keeps you in the flow and able to do the job quickly. So I started out and there was a feeling of ease, right? So there is a good user interface on TaxSlayer. I felt really happy that they kind of led you through in a pretty nice way, just like name, social security, the basic questions. It was pretty gentle, pretty easy. It did move me through the parts of the tax return. It had it broken out logically into, income, deductions, tax credits, the sort of basics, right? There was not a lot of guidance about kind of you should do it in this order or start here. It just kind of like once I filled out name, social security, like basic taxpayer info, I was sort of like, I had to kind of figure out where to go next on my own. I felt a little moment of like, what do I do? So there was that. But overall, I would say that those sections like income, deductions, credits, those were pretty clear. And you could click into each one and inside it would name for you the names of the tax forms that are income forms and the ones that show you, deductible items forms or tax statements you need to claim certain tax credits, right? So that it was fairly clear and you could click into each one and you could fill out the information you needed for that form and then click if you had another of that same type of form or move on. So that felt pretty clear. I was pretty happy with that. I will say that when I finished entering all the forms that I had to fill out, I did not have a good sense of what came next. There was not a sense of completeness, right? I had to rely on my own notes and my own memory to know if I was done. There was no indication inside the program. I'm not sure how they would do that. That might be a hard problem to solve. I want to be fair to TaxSlayer designers. But then it gave me kind of I could click to see a summary, right? So I'm looking at the summary and it's summarizing all the income that is taxable. And, so it's got the sort of parts, your basic, like, this is your income. These are your itemized expenses. I say itemized because part of the point of me filing this particular tax return is that there was a nursing facility that is tremendously expensive, as those facilities are, that was entirely deductible as an itemized deduction on a Schedule A. This is part of why I was asked to come in. So I'm looking at all these things and everything is there. Everything is registered. However, there was a mistake, right? So there was one of the tax forms was for a Roth IRA distribution. And if you know anything about Roth, and you don't need to be a tax expert to know this, if you've listened to the Sunlight podcast, you will know that a distribution from your Roth IRA should not be taxable, right? That's the whole deal. Now, TaxSlayer was listing it as taxable, right? So this was like $40,000, $50,000 of income that was being taxed and showing up as, $10,000 of tax-ish that shouldn't have been there, right? Who wants to receive an incorrect $10,000 tax bill? That should not have been taxed, right? And this was a point in the return where I felt really frustrated. So I think if I didn't have a lot of experience doing tax returns, at this point, I kind of would have flipped out, freaked out. I might not have noticed. I might have paid an incorrect tax bill. I might have actually overpaid taxes by $10,000 and never known. I think the IRS in general would have caught this mistake and sent me a letter and sent me the money back. That's generally true. But what seemed to me to be the actual problem is that there was a code written ambiguously on this tax form. It was kind of like not a real valid code. And the software had made a guess about the code and the guess was wrong. And I had no way to see what the software was doing. There was no way for me to have insight about what had happened. Now, this probably is the zone of a tax professional in general. If your software is making mistake with your stuff, like you're going to have to kind of raise it to the supervisor level at that point, generally, most people. But unfortunately, there was no insight about why it was making this Roth distribution taxable. There was no alert that said this code, this taxability code is not one of the valid codes. Like that would have alerted me or someone. There was nothing, right? It just made a guess and the guess was wrong and resulted in a massive tax bill that this person did not actually owe. So that was super frustrating. What was also frustrating, I had no way within the software to correct this mistake. That was super annoying. And in fact, it was pushing me to pay for an expert, right? Pay that extra fee to talk to an expert. And the thing is, I'm an expert enough to know this shouldn't be taxable. I don't have a question about tax law. I have a question about the software not working, right? This is a software issue. So that was a little frustrating, right? Actually, it was very frustrating. It's quite annoying. In the end, I just deleted the form right off the return. This was my only way to make sure that there was no tax implication. I understand that this may cause the IRS to send a letter to me and my mother over this form, but ultimately I know that it will, be ruled in our favor because I know the taxability, that ultimately we came up with a correct taxable number on the tax return by deleting that form. So if the IRS has an issue with it, they'll get in touch with me. I'll talk with them. I'm not worried about that, right? Because we did it right. But it was very frustrating that I couldn't enter and acknowledge this form, or when I did, that I was being taxed on something that shouldn't be taxable. So that was super, super irritating. Then the thing that was also really irritating about this snafu as I was doing this return is that, so normally as a professional, in my own professional grade tax software, I would switch from the input view where I'm entering, data entry. I would switch to the forms view and look at the actual tax form and how that info is populating on the actual tax document. And I would have some ability there to kind of see how the calculation is made. And if I needed to, go to the actual tax worksheet that gets sent to the IRS as part of the tax return to see how that calculation was being made. And I could identify, it's much trickier to see it there. You have to really know what you're doing, but it's possible to see, right? So that's what I was looking for. I was not allowed inside TaxSlayer to look at the forms until I paid. This was annoying because it's a software that's clearly making terrible mistakes, and I didn't want to pay. I wanted to see why this horrible mistake was happening. So that was frustrating. It was also frustrating that they really had me over a barrel. I had done the whole tax return at that point. I was in the review phase. I was almost done. And all I wanted to do was fix a mistake, get it corrected, and then submit the return. So I find it really unethical that I was forced to pay in order to investigate a mistake that the software made. I don't think that's cool. But that was what happened. I had to actually pay the fee for the whole tax return in order to kind of dig deeper and investigate further. Ultimately, I had to take matters into my own hand and just delete this form off the tax return altogether to make the numbers come out correctly. So that was frustrating. The other thing that felt like a sneak attack was that, remember I was telling you that they had told me this return would cost $33. Well, it cost $89, $88 and change, because it turns out they charge $50 for the state tax return. They did not mention this up front, and I find that unethical because you have to file a state return. I mean, unless you're in Texas or Florida or another tax-free state. So it just felt really unethical to me that, of course, I also need to do a state return for Massachusetts. And this was not transparent in the beginning as I got started. They let me do 100% of the work of doing the tax return, knowing that most taxpayers never want to do that. They want to get it over with as fast as they can. They let you do all the work, and then they're going to erase the work if you decide you don't want to pay this new increased fee. That really feels unethical. I think Congress should not allow this behavior to even exist. And yet I know that Intuit does this as well. It's not just TaxSlayer. I think this is actually an industry norm, and it sucks. So I'm just here saying, if you are in Congress listening to this, I think this is an unethical practice, and I think it needs to be made to stop. So there was no transparency at the beginning of the process about what was actually going to be needed on my part as a taxpayer, like the full process, not just a federal return, but also your state return. And there was not transparency about what the full charge would be in the end. There also was not any information, at least not upfront or clearly visible. Maybe I could have dug through some terms and conditions that talked about what would happen if there was a mistake that was the fault of the software and not me, the taxpayer. So I have a couple takeaways for you. Knowing some basic tax rules proved incredibly helpful in filing this tax return. Ultimately, I knew as I looked at the income that was being reported as taxable that it was way too high, and that alerted me to go start investigating what was being counted as income that should not be. So yes, I am a tax professional. Yes, I am well trained in this, but this is something you can know too, right? You don't have to be a tax expert to know, to have the knowledge that a Roth distribution is not taxable. So that is something that you should be able to figure out. I'm not saying you should in a scolding way. I'm just saying it is within a capability that you can have. This is a power that you can have if you know a baseline amount of information about your own taxes and how they work, right? It also helps to not just check out about your taxes all year long, but to have a bit of a sense of what's going on in your taxes a couple times a year, because then when you get to tax time, if it's all a surprise to you, you're much less likely to correct mistakes, to see spot mistakes. But if you have a sense of like what your income should be for the year, then when it comes out, $50,000 higher than that, you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And then you know to look for something, right? Even if you had a sense that that was wrong, but you weren't sure what, you would know that you should take it to somebody to get some professional eyes on it before you submitted it and just paid a tax you don't actually owe. So this is where I'm saying that checking in on your taxes, having a sense of how some basic tax things work would help you if a big mistake like this happened when you were doing your own taxes. All right. I do think that having a product that makes mistakes and then not like having a way for the consumer to have a recourse over this mistake, that feels unethical to me. I feel pretty annoyed. And the surprise pricing really felt very unethical to me, for sure. Now, also not having transparency over the process, again, that felt really unethical as well. Having your work trashed, allowing the consumer to just spend the full amount of time working on the tax return, getting almost to the point of completion, and then surprising them with a price, that feels unethical to me. I think those software companies know perfectly well and are using a very manipulative method that you don't want to do that work again, right? You don't want to waste all that time and all that effort, and that you're pretty much going to pay whatever surprise charge they throw at you at that point in your life. So I think the process of doing your tax return, that bit of fear and confusion, that is why they are able to surprise charge you like that. And I do not like it. I do not like it. I think, first of all, we should not be so afraid of our taxes. I think the tax system should itself be simpler. I think we should all, as citizens, as taxpayers, have a better sense of how our taxes work. I would like that. I think we need a basic tax education in this country. And I just think that would improve the tax. I think it would make you less fearful when you did your tax return. It would make mistakes less likely to happen because you would be more able to catch them. And, also, if it was easy for you to do your taxes, it wouldn't be such a big deal when you got a big surprise charge. You wouldn't feel as compelled to pay it if you knew that in 10 minutes you could redo the whole thing, right? So those are my personal feelings on how I think this system could actually be, but isn't at the moment. So I will say I'm super excited. The IRS free file is becoming more and more a reality for more taxpayers in more states. I do highly recommend that you try it out this year if you can. Get yourself a free tax return if you can. It's not going to work if your income is above a certain threshold. I think that threshold breaks out somewhere around $70,000, although that varies a little bit by state. You also have to look and be sure that your state tax return can be included with the IRS free file. Not all states are making that available. So check out the website. I'll link to it in the show notes. And I do think that, until free file is available to all taxpayers, and I don't know that it ever will be, but we can put this on our radar. We can lobby our Congress people if we want to. I do think that you're better served as a higher income taxpayer working with a tax professional than working with, awful software, unless you've been working with that software for a while and it's not making mistakes and you feel good with it. That's fine. I'm not here to judge. And I honestly, since I sold my own tax preparation piece of my business, I have no skin in the game here. I don't make income one way or the other, depending on what you decide. I'm really here to just say what I think is the best. So you can ask me, feel free to DM me, if you have thoughts about your own tax return or what you should do. I'm happy to, point you in the direction if you want. All right. But in the meantime, at least until tax education is part of every civics class in every high school across the entire US, which I think it should be, until that time, I'm here hoping that you get a lot out of the Sunlight podcast. I hope that you, as a regular listener, know, for example, that Roth distributions are not taxable. I think you probably do if you've listened to this podcast for long enough. And so I hope that all of you pat yourself on the back and feel good about the fact that you have a weekly check-in about your taxes and kind of think about this stuff more than once per year. And I think that's really healthy for your overall tax situation. So I thank you for listening to this podcast and for getting yourself tuned up in the area of your own tax knowledge. It's something I am so happy to provide for you and really glad that you have. On that note, if you feel that you want to go even deeper on getting a handle on your taxes, setting up bookkeeping, knowing how to pay your estimated quarterly taxes every quarter with a live session with me, plus lots of other resources like a tax nudge calendar that integrates into your Google Calendar and really empathetic, easy courses that help you get the knowledge you want. I am hosting an open house for my program, Money Bootcamp. This open house is coming up on Thursday, September 5th. It's free. It'll be about an hour. There's no pitch. It's not like a sales session. It's just an open house so that you can come and see what's inside. You can ask me questions. I always have a 2-for-1 deal on my program for married couples who file jointly because I ethically believe that spouses who share income should be on the same page when it comes to their taxes. So if, for example, you've thought about Money Bootcamp, but you want your spouse to see it before you make the decision, bring your spouse. They're welcome to come too, and they can ask their questions. That's fine. Please understand that this is not a session for you to just ask me tax questions. That is a paid service I offer. Of course, you can always pay for a consult with me. I'm very happy to answer your tax questions in that context. But my open house is about my program. So this is a place for questions about my program. If it's a fit for you, if it'll work for someone like you, that kind of thing. All right. And I welcome you to be there. I'm really excited to show you inside my program because I'm really proud of it and it really works. So that session is at noon Eastern time on September 5th, and you can register at the link in the show notes. And I'm really excited to see you there. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.